there guys, gals, and non-binary pals, GM Potter here. Welcome to my channel where I review books and bookish things. If you like what you see, please consider subscribing. So today we are getting into From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death by Caitlin Doughty, also known as Ask a Mortician here on YouTube. Found this book, I tracked down this book after wanting to read it for quite some time, so let's get into it. Okay, so this book came out in 2017. Other books that she's written are Smoke Gets in Your Eye and Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, which I've read, and it's fantastic. It's basically a book of children's questions that she's gotten, and then she answers them. And it's cute, it's funny, but it's also it's cute, it's funny, but it's also very like knowledge heavy. So it's like a whole bunch of like random little facts and things. So it's a good book. I highly recommend that one. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about From Here to Eternity. So this book is an examination of funeral rites and rituals from around the world. We start off in Crestone. I think that's how you say it. Crestone. I'm not sure. In Colorado for the End of Life project. She goes over a modern funeral pyre that they do. It's an open air cremation pit. Cremation dais, and how it's a celebration of life and love for the individual that had died, and it's really cool. It talks about the political struggles that they faced with zoning and getting people on board with it, but once the End of Life project got it together, it actually, people were clamoring to be part of it, and you have to actually be a resident of the town in order to be cremated this way. So there's a business of people buying plots of land and like things so that they can say that they're a resident and then have this as their end of life plan, which I think is really cool. So and then we go to Indonesia for the Manine. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It was hard to Google because I kept getting Real Housewives of, I think it was Atlanta, results, so it was hard to find out how to pronounce this one. Where bodies are mummified and exhumed and cleaned on a regular basis. The bodies are talked to and dressed and taken care of like as though they are still an active part of the family. Like, they're obviously still part of the family, but as though they were an active part of the family, which is really cool. And which this has led to the death tourism trade. But outsiders aren't really welcome. They're more tolerated. And Caitlin Doughty talks about how kind of the ugly tourists, and how she hopes that she's not one of those, because she is coming to it with a very respectful point of view instead of ghoulish tourism. So that one was really interesting. And then we go to Mexico for Michoacan for El Dia de los Muertos, which I grew up on the Mexican border, so this was something that I was somewhat familiar with. But she makes an interesting point about the James Bond movie Spectre, in which they have the big celebration for El Dia de los Muertos in Mexico City, and the Mexico City now has that parade, but it was in response to James Bond because they were disappointed tourists that came and were expecting this big celebration for it, when it was more of a reverent thing and less of a tourist thing. So now it's become this whole tourist thing, and the locals are split. That yes, it has a large influx of money, and that's a good thing, but it also kind of cheapens the ritual and the tradition. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But it examines the healing aspect. This section of the book, this chapter, examines the healing aspect of it, and that no one is forgotten, and it goes over a woman who lost a child, um, and how she embraced this tradition that the child wouldn't be forgotten and wouldn't be just left behind. And it was beautiful, and it talks about the healing nature of the tradition, and it just I really enjoyed this book because Caitlin Doughty is an outsider to pretty much all of this, and growing up, obviously white as I am, on the Mexican border, I was an outsider to it because my family didn't practice it, and there were biases and things towards it, and it helped me gain an understanding of my classmates and of the people that I grew up around, and I thought that was really interesting. So, next we go to North Carolina, to the Forest, or Forensic Osteology Research Station, also known as a body farm. Um, and they return bodies to the earth. They're experimenting with how to get them to decompose fully, kind of a leave no trace for bodies, and doing things with heat and moisture and things like that, and experimenting with this, which I thought was really interesting because the modern funeral arrangements are basically you get stuffed in a steel Tupperware and left to fester in your own juices so it doesn't get into the earth. And for thousands upon thousands of years prior to this, prior to the embalming industry, we were leaving our bodies to decompose naturally in the earth and being one with the soil and things. And I like that there's a movement to go back to that you're not removed from the earth, that you're not separate from it, that you're not apart from this planet, that you're actually a part of it. And I like that. Like, I thought that was really cool. So, and then we go to Spain, which Spain was very different from Mexico, which obviously they're two different countries on two different continents and coming from two different cultures, but the amount of different kind of took me by surprise. In Spain, at least with what she went over, it's very clinical. It's very separated. There's literally a pane of glass separating you from the body. Like, you can either have the body in a glass casket, Snow White style, or for the viewing, the body is in a different room separated by a wall of glass. Which was just weird to me that you would want that separation. I grew up Catholic and half Lutheran. My mom's side of the family is Lutheran. My dad's side of the family is Catholic. And on my dad's side of the family, like, I remember one of my first memories is, not my first memories, but my first memories of death is we went to a funeral up in Minnesota for a family, and they were putting things in the casket, and they were kissing her forehead and, like, touching her, and, like, it was very intimate. I, of course, being a small child, didn't understand what death was not prepared for this, freaked out, caused a scene, and my dad had to remove me, and he bought me a little toy truck to calm me down. I still have the toy truck. But anyway, yeah, it's more intimate, at least in the funerals on my dad's side of the family that I've been to, that you're leaning in and whispering to the body and touching the body and putting things in the casket with the body, and it's more. It's not as removed as what was described as happening in Spain, and it makes me wonder if that even works for the grieving process. To have it behind this wall of glass and to be very, very clinical with it and things, and it just, I don't know, it didn't hit right to me. And also something that was really interesting is that the graves themselves are rented, that you take out a lease on the grave, and some people can't pay, and it just kind of reminded me of Repo the Genetic Opera a little bit, but instead of removing body parts, you're removing whole bodies from their theoretically eternal resting places. And I thought that was really just weird to me. Like, it's not weird to them, it's normal, and apparently this is fairly common in Europe, where space is limited. Space is very limited, and it seemed weird that you would just rent a grave instead of buying the plot of land. So, and then we go to Japan, which Japan was fascinating to me. As you may or may not know, Japan has a suicide culture, from harikari to kamikaze pilots, that it's, instead of in Western cultures where it's seen as kind of selfish and self-serving, it's seen as more noble and altruistic, which I found was a very interesting take on it. It's still horrible to me that someone would end their life, as someone who has had that ideation and attempts in their past. The idea that it would be venerated is kind of horrible, but it's a different culture. I can't really judge it that way. It's just so far removed from what I'm used to. Additionally, she talks about their cremation rate, which is 99.97%, which is a very high cremation rate, which makes sense because Japan is very crowded. There's not a lot of space. But something that is interesting is Japan. What do we know about Japan? It's very tech savvy, very tech focused, and this extends into their death culture. She went to, and I'm going to butcher this because I don't speak Japanese. Kuji, Buddhist temple, where she has this beautiful illustration of what happens in the book. You see, we have all these Buddhas, and some of them are illuminated, like here, that some of them are lit up. And essentially, you enter today's date, and it brings you everybody that's died on March 20th. Let's say March 20th. And it brings up everybody that died on March 20th, and then you can pray for them and do the ritual for them, so no one is left behind, no one is forgotten. And I thought that was a very, very clever way of doing it. And at another temple, this one, you basically have a key card, and it pulls up, it reminded me of a vending machine, of those Carvana vending machines. It pulls up their urn and a little place to put flowers and a little place to burn incense, and you scan the key card, and it pulls up that family member's urn. And it was kind of like a vending machine for the dead, which I thought was kind of cool, kind of creepy, but kind of cool. And then we go to Bolivia, La Paz, which November 8th, they celebrate the Fiesta de las Ñatitas. Ñatitas, I think is how you say that. My Spanish is not as good as it should be for someone who grew up on the border. But it literally translates to flat-nosed ones. They're skulls that grant miracles. So it celebrates the skulls, thanks them for their service. A lot of times the skulls come from strangers, but sometimes it's from family members, and they preserve the skull, and they give them little hats or little cigarettes, and like it was kind of cool. Like I was saying, they come from, more and more often the skulls are coming from family members who've been evicted from their burial plots, which in Bolivia, apparently, like Spain and like a lot of Europe, you rent your funeral plot. And what happens when you can't pay? Well, you have to do something with the body, and the body is kind of, it doesn't really go into what happens to the body, but the skull is kept in the home and taken care of. And that was kind of cool. It talks about, she visits a couple different women who take care of the skulls, and they have little boxes there, and they're given names, and the names don't necessarily correlate with what they were called in their living life. That's just what they call them. That the one of the women says that the names come to her in a dream, and so that's what she calls them, is these names, and she's told in a dream when to go get the skulls, and what their powers are. Some are for healing, and some are for fortune, and things like that. And I thought that was kind of cool. And then we go to Joshua Tree in California, which is where Undertaking LA, that's the author's funeral home, and how she kind of goes to a more naturalistic approach and talking about her travels and things, and how she hopes that people understand, and that death impacts us all, that it's the great equalizer, that death is something that we all share regardless of culture. It's just how you approach it, and kind of her reflections in summing up the book. I highly, highly recommend this book. Should you read it? Yes, I give this one 5 stars. It is fantastic and interesting, and I think learning a little bit more about death culture kind of brings us together with our fellow man. So, yeah. Should you read this one? Definitely. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have you read any of Caitlin Doty's books? Do you watch her YouTube channel, Ask Mortician? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.